Alright, Brent Porcio, topvelocity.net, and do a pitch analysis here for Chris. I'm going to pair him up with Gio Gonzalez. Take Chris here into his leg lift. Take Gio here into his leg lift. Okay, so they're just, they're both working in very different leg lifts. Gio's working the higher leg lift. Chris is working more from a slide step, which is fine. Obviously Chris is with this shoulder angle and his crouch or his lean forward. He's ultimately trying to get into a more sidearm or submarine arm angle. Just because I've evaluated his delivery already, I have some issues with, or not some issues. I have some just some information to put out there that ultimately would probably give you a different perspective and maybe change your approach. The point being is, Gio is a little bit higher in his arm slot than you, but not that much. And because you start so early trying to put your shoulders in position for your arm slot, it takes away from all the key components that high velocity pitchers do to generate high velocities. So ultimately, it's something that you're probably going to want to reevaluate and consider here, because we want to try to be in a more vertical position in the beginning, even if we're a sidearm pitcher, and we want to do things high velocity pitchers do from there. We want to lead with the hips to get the drive leg, or get the weight inside the drive leg, which you're already in, which is good. And ultimately that is the key thing. Just trying to keep also the shoulders following the hips, but you're still kind of there as well. You'll just see how this kind of lean over your toes forward is how it's going to cause a problem when it comes to hip to shoulder separation. So we'll take you to your load. So as your lift leg moves forward, we see you moving forward, not as much moving down. Okay, it's not a very quick move, because you can see the arms are moving as fast as the lower half. That's usually an indication of the stride is too slow. Okay, and this is where your lift leg knee breaks your front hip. That's where I like to, or that's ultimately where your best opportunity for hitting the linear force vector is going to be. So watch, if we take Gio down the mound, you'll see he's moving forward, he's moving down, and when his lift leg knee breaks his front hip, he's in that good linear position. Okay, you can see somewhere shooting to that front hip. You can see this arm is still down, so he was moving fast enough to keep the arm riding instead of swinging up and back. Okay, so big difference between the two here. Chris is very vertical. So what these high velocity pitchers do is they move from their original hip positions at leg lift to a good hip position at the load that puts the drive leg in a linear position, which this is not. This is definitely a vertical position. They move forward and down at the same rate. So that's what we need to learn to do coming out of lift to load, just like Gio does here well. Here is his hip position. He moves forward and down. We can see kind of, and it's a consistent movement. It's not something that is going too sharp to where it has to redirect. We can see the movement was pretty much in this direction. And that's a good movement, because it's going to put all that pressure in the front foot, which is what we want. We don't want something coming down and then going out. We don't want something just going out, because we'll never get this flexion here. And we need flexion like Gio has here. We have a break in the knee. We have dorsiflexion in the ankle. We need all that to generate extension or power through extension, which is our power component. So you can see here at this point, Chris, you're very vertical, and you're starting to open your front side. So what's going to happen is you're going to open your front side. You maybe give it maybe a little push there, but really not much. Then you're going to fall into it and still in the rubber. Your hips are still closed. Now your hips are going to start coming through late, and the front leg is trying to stabilize even though it's not. We can't have that kind of knee flexion. Now you're losing the ability to convert that, whatever power you generated in your stride. And then when your hips get through right there, we can see your shoulders are right behind it. So now here's the problem, is because you started leaning forward, when your arm started to come down into the cock position, it's cocking below your elbow. When we start to rotate the shoulders now, this becomes a problem because we put too much torque on the elbow. Because we have the elbow in too much flexion, which research shows when you start to apply the load or the valgus load to the front of the arm, and the arm is in a lot of flexion, then we put more stress on the UCL specifically. So that's the problem health-wise, and we'll show the problem mechanically. Well, you can see it here. Because of the slow dynamic stride and also the point of the hips opening, we really have no hip to shoulder separation because we can see the hips and shoulders moving together. That would have been supported. It would have been easier, and we'll show with you. It's easier to keep this shoulder here back from moving with this hip if we're more vertical and we actually have some gravity pulling on it. So you can see he's starting to cock the arm up as he's moving, as he's opening the front side and extending the drive leg side. He's a little late here just because he's not throwing at max effort, but you can see he still is able to get kicked through off the mound into front foot, and you can see the hips pop open because he has no lead knee flexion. He lands strong and stabilizes so those hips the power of that drive leg can pop those hips open as he continues to apply force to the front leg to stabilize it and extend into it. And then look what happens here. So his arm went down to up into the cock position, and your arm went up to down in the cock position. So look at this shoulder here. See, it's more pulled away from the hips. So if we took your hip to shoulder separation here, it's pretty much the same position. We can see you both have the extension in the back leg, hips are open, and this is the point of those hips opening. You can see a considerable difference. I like to assess hip to shoulder separation as if I'm looking through a bird's eye view. So this would be the top of his head. If I drew right hip to left hip, it would be something like this. If I drew right shoulder to left shoulder, it'd be something like this. So there would be his degrees of separation, more between that 40 to 60 degrees, which is common of high velocity pitchers. If I did the same thing to you, took your hip to shoulder or I took the bird's eye view, that's your head, right hip to left hip, right shoulder to left shoulder, there's your separation. You can see a lot less of separation. Now notice when also Gio's shoulders start to rotate. Now when you can create this kind of torque in the body, and the reason, even if you're a sidearm guy, we still have to create as much torque as we can, because this is what high velocity pitchers do. They get 40 to 60 degrees. You're more 10 to maybe 15 degrees. For you to get this kind of hip shoulder separation, you need to learn those key movements that I showed you in the stride, from lift to load and then triple extension before a stable front leg. Once you do that, we want to support the hip to shoulder separation by tilting actually back the other way. You were tilting inward. We want to tilt back over the butt. That puts some gravity on the shoulder and supports that hip to shoulder separation. From here, we can then move into a sidearm slot. Now, if we're a sub guy, then it's a different story, but you're not. You're more in a side arm slot. You can do that from here without losing considerable amounts of velocity by not supporting hip shoulder separation and leaning inward over your toes during your stride. Because watch Gio. Once we get this torsion in the body, that means the shoulders are going to rotate at speeds higher than the hips. So what you're going to get is the fastest move in all of baseball in those shoulder speeds. You're going to get some forward trunk tilt as long as you stay stable here, and you're going to get this optimal external rotation, which is common of high velocity pitchers. You can see when you don't have that torque and when your elbow's down, which, like I said, look at Gio's elbows up. We know shoulder abduction, more the shoulders abducted up in the air, that actually creates or supports more external rotation and more better conversion of force into the ball, which increases velocity. It also puts the UCL a little bit more of a protected area because there's less flexion in the elbow. You can see when you go to that position, your elbow's way down. You've put more flexion in your elbow during the valgus load of external rotation, and now you're making your arm vulnerable. As you know, maybe not now because you don't throw hard enough, but if you start to get bigger and stronger and exceed the speed you're at now, you will start to put your UCLA in a vulnerable position. So that's two negatives to a low arm slot during external rotation. One is it's dangerous, and two is it doesn't support high velocities as well as shoulder abduction. Now you'd think getting this abducted, Gio would be releasing the ball like Chapman or Trevor Bauer, some of these guys that are more over the top, but he still from here goes into almost a sidearm slot. I mean, that's more your 3/4. But if you look at the difference of now when your arm goes, and look how late it goes. Yours goes way out in front of your face. Gio's is slightly above his head, but right off the tip of his hat. Yours is way out in front of your face. Look at if we took a behind the back view. If I drew a clock here just to see where we are rotationally on the release, here's our clock here. 12 to 6, 3 to 9. He would be right here. He'd probably be little around, somewhere around 10 o'clock. If we draw you of course would be right at 9. So that's the difference between you and him right here when it comes to arm slot. So my point is, this is going to maybe give you a little bit more east to west spin, which if you had a good spin rate might be a little bit more effective than him. But because his spin rate is higher, because he's a higher velocity guy, this 10 arm slot is going to be considerably more effective because of the spin rate. So the point is arm slots can help if you're a low velocity guy, but spin rate is more effective and proven more effective along with velocity. So if you're sacrificing velocity and spin rate, which is the product of these components that Gio is showing here and the way he's moving through them, if you're sacrificing that just for a 9 arm slot instead of a 10 o'clock arm slot, I really don't think that is a smart move. So if I was you, I would work to replicate these mechanics. Take someone like Gio, who's kind of similar to your build, a lot more stockier, left-handed, who is not incredibly dynamic and explosive, but he does everything very, very well. So if you could learn these moves, correct that tilt, start in that more vertical position, learn to get the force vector loaded and linear, and learn to achieve triple extension before front foot strike with that shoulder tilt, and create these kind of this kind of hip to shoulder separation, and then try to get it abducted over shoulder, specifically just elbow over shoulder height to protect the elbow, and then from there kick out to a 10 o'clock arm slot, or maybe even lower if you want to. Randy Johnson can still get here, or when he pitched, and get maybe closer to a 9 o'clock. You're going to put yourself better chance of putting yourself in that high velocity category. So Gio, I hope this helps. I hope you understand this perspective and advice I've given you here, because I really believe this would be key for you. Now, how we do that with the 3x pitching velocity program, the 3x pitching velocity program is going to help you do all of this. It's going to give you drills, throwing drills, to teach you how to move this way, it ultimately forces you how to move this way. That's why they're incredibly difficult. And then we're also going to train you through the strength and conditioning program, anaerobic conditioning program, that's going to build you into this kind of athlete, where you'll have ultimately one day this kind of leg strength, leg power, to where you can get down, get loaded, get linear, and then build that power through triple extension before you land, because that's what we're training through all the key lifts, exercises, and drills through Expedition Velocity Program. So I think you'd be a perfect candidate for it. It would help you make this transition into a more high velocity pitcher, even at a 3/4 sidearm slot. And if you have any questions on it, if you need any more information, please post it here, and would love to help you get started.